Persona 3 Reload just got a patch on Switch 2 and this is a big one. Atlas have added a proper performance mode targeting 60 frames per second, and if you've played this before, you already know why this matters. So let's not mess around, let's get straight into it with what this update promises, what it actually delivers, and what the trade-off is. And if this helps you out today, do me a favor and subscribe, and now, let's get into it. So first, the patch itself. This is version 1.03 for Persona 3 Reload on Switch 2. The headline feature here is a new performance mode that's available in TV mode. It targets 60 FPS. Beyond that, Atlas also says overall frame rate stability has been improved across both TV mode and handheld mode, aiming for a smoother experience even outside that performance setting. They've also confirmed that the free demo will receive this same Switch 2 update in the coming days. And on paper, this is pretty much exactly what people were asking for at launch, though not quite everything. Ideally, we'd also have a 60 FPS option in handheld, and maybe that's something that comes later, maybe even like a 40 FPS, but even as it stands, this is definitely a meaningful step forwards. But first, if you somehow missed it, Persona 3 Reload is a full remake of one of Atlas's most beloved RPGs. It's really built around contrast. The whole series is you live this fairly normal school life during the day, managing classes, friendships, and social links, but then at night you're pulled into something far darker. And in this entry, that is, there's a hidden hour between days. It's a towering dungeon called Tartarus, and there's this constant sense that time is slipping by whether you're ready or not. It is a game that leans heavily on mood and presentation, animated menus, camera movement in combat, the flow between battles and exploration. It's all very deliberate and very stylish. And because of that, performance really matters. This isn't a slow, static RPG. It's always in motion. But overall, I'll say this, I am a big fan of this remake. However, until now on Switch 2, being locked at 30 frames per second, it was playable, do not get me wrong, but it was always still the one technical caveat holding it back. And I think going into this, the big questions for me were, what's the visual trade-off for 60 FPS, and how stable is it in real gameplay? And that's what we're going to be testing here, breaking down frame rate behavior and comparing the visuals side by side. So with that in mind, let's start with frame rate, because I think that's the big question everyone's going to have, and honestly, I'll say it up front, feels night and day. Now, performance mode is enabled via the system menu, and immediately you feel the difference. The gameplay is more responsive, camera movement is smoother, and everything just feels snappier. But the key word here from Atlas is targets. It targets 60 FPS, which immediately tells me this isn't going to be perfectly consistent. So I tested two sections that were already known to push the frame rate. First, Tartarus, the game's dungeon. It evolves as you progress. It's heavy on movement, effects, and combat. And then second, the high school, which is densely populated and was one of the areas that tripped the game up most at 30 FPS. Now, starting with Tartarus, the results are spot on. For a good majority of gameplay, the frame rate sits right at 60. Even during action-heavy moments, it barely moves. The high school, still more demanding, and that hasn't really changed. In the main lobby area, where there's a large crowd of NPCs, I did see fluctuations, typically dropping down to around 55 frames per second. You will notice that visually as well if you are sensitive to frame rate, but even here, it's a massive improvement. There's no question about it. What's also worth calling out though is the 30 FPS mode. This has seen a notable improvement as well. At launch, the game had a micro stutter issue, especially in the high school. It was a frame time problem that would pop up every so often, but it was extremely hard to ignore once you noticed it. Now, in my testing, that issue appears to have been completely corrected. I didn't encounter it once, and honestly, that alone is a win. So yeah, from a frame rate perspective, this update delivers what fans were asking for. Performance mode gives you a mostly solid 60, and the original 30 mode is now far more stable than it was at launch. But this then brings us to visuals and the question of what this game gives up to hit that higher frame rate. And I will say here, visually, there are trade-offs in performance mode, but they're subtle, and you really only notice them when you stop and look side by side. The most immediate change is a slight drop in image clarity. It looks like resolution, it's been dialed back a little, or at least made more dynamic, because fine detail doesn't appear quite as crisp as it does in the original 30 mode. Hard edges around furniture, shelving, door frames, and character outlines look slightly softer, particularly in static scenes like the protagonist's room. Alongside that, aliasing is a bit more noticeable. You can see increased stair stepping along straight lines and thin geometry such as chair legs, shelf brackets, and desk edges. In isolation, it's easy to miss, but in direct comparison, it's very clear that anti-aliasing is doing slightly less work in 60. Once the game is in motion though, the smoother frame rate actually helps mask a lot of this, and the overall presentation often feels cleaner in my opinion, despite that softer image. Lighting then is what I would say is the big thing. This is the area where the differences show up. Performance mode appears slightly brighter and flatter overall. Shadows aren't quite as deep, contrast is reduced a touch, and indirect lighting feels a bit less pronounced. The room looks more evenly lit with fewer dramatic shadow gradients and less depth in darker corners. Now, it's not a dramatic downgrade and it doesn't break the game's visual style, but it does slightly reduce the moodiness Persona 3 Reload is known for. And this likely comes down to small reductions in shadow resolution, ambient occlusion, or maybe even lighting complexity to really help maintain that performance. But I think what's really important here is that none of these changes feel aggressive. There's no obvious texture loss, no missing effects, and no distracting pop-in. Atlus hasn't gutted the visuals to hit 60. Instead, they've made careful, targeted adjustments that most players won't notice unless they're actively looking for them. And in return, you get a much smoother, more responsive experience that genuinely just improves how this game feels to play. So overall for me, Persona 3 Reload on Switch 2 is in a much better place after this update. Performance mode trades a bit of sharpness, slightly increased aliasing, and a flatter lighting profile for a near 60 presentation. And for a game that's constantly in motion, menu heavy, and animation driven, that is a trade-off that it makes all of the sense. So yeah, that's the update. If you're revisiting Persona 3 Reload after this patch or jumping in for the first time on Switch 2, let me know in the comments which mode you're going to use. And yeah, if this breakdown helped, consider subscribing. It helps out the channel a huge amount. All right, I'll see you on the next one. Cheers all.